Hello everyone. I hope you all are doing great and I hope you are all staying safe and healthy. So today we are having Bhaskar Diosa with us. This is Lakshit Pant, myself Lakshit Pant, and I am Community Relation Manager at Azure Developer Community. And today we are having our guest, MVP guest, as Bhaskar Diosa is here to give you some insights on Azure IoT and data security on cloud computing. So he'll be giving you the crux about how you can improve your how you can get hands-on with Azure IoT and cloud security in Microsoft Azure. Let me give a little brief about Bhaskar sir. So he's CEO and founder at Trailbit, and his entire journey, if you will, he's IIT Kharagpur alumni. His entire journey spent in research work. He has been doing incredible work in research scientist work. So I'm just sharing his LinkedIn profile, which must need to be shared with all the audience. So it's here. So LinkedIn profile is here, so you can just connect with him. So over to you, sir.
Uh, Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? All good? Hi.
Yes, sir, we
So,
can
hi.
hear you.
Great. So, hi, everyone. I'm Bhaskar. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Trillbit. Uh, we are an IoT data startup, and we do IoT security and setup using a technology called data over sound. And I'll talk more about in general IoT, where the market is going, but what are the challenges, like different challenges in terms of the cybersecurity, device onboarding, and what do you do and how do you secure your data uh, on these IoT platforms. Uh, I'm based in Boston, and I don't know if you'll have time at the end, but I'm happy to answer any questions you have. You can reach out directly to me. Uh, and let's get going. So I'll share my screen, and then we'll talk a little bit about different aspects of IoT and IoT security. Just a second here. All right. So
Okay. So
can
yes,
you
sir. Yes.
share? Can you see my screen?
Yes, sir. It's visible.
Okay, great. All right. So IoT has been steadily growing. In the next 10 years, about 50 billion IoT devices will be sold. The whole industry is growing at more than 10% growth rate year over year over the last decade. And that is going to be uh, over $1 trillion industry in the next decade. However, there are basically huge problems with IoT, and that is related to IoT security. Now, because of this problem, I'm sure there's a whole uh, website, and it would be interesting if you want to look at it. It's called Iot Hall of Shame. And essentially, what it is, it's all the list of different high and low profile hacks that has been performed on these IoT devices. So if we look at our entire cybersecurity landscape, the biggest chink in our armor is the IoT security. So much so that governments and regulatory bodies have to come up and make laws in order to force companies to secure these devices. They're vulnerable to denial of service attacks in the simplest form, but they are part of but they could be part of even malicious and dangerous attacks on critical infrastructure, um, uh, ranging from cybersecurity infrastructure to even dangerous installations like nuclear and security infrastructure. So California passed a law in 2018 making banning all default password on IoT devices. EU has similarly passed a law in 2019. There's another law in Japan. And not only that they ban default password, they have put the onus of having the best IoT security or a standard IoT security in open-ended way directly on the device manufacturer. So we'll be seeing a lot more focus, and we're already seeing a lot more focus on IoT devices and how do you secure them on the network, and how do you secure that data on the cloud. So if you look at the IoT security, there are three major components, right? One, how do you connect this device to the network, right? Because often these devices do not have, like a keyboard or even a touch interface. They are headless. By headless, you mean devices that do not really have any kind of a input interface. So how do you connect those devices to the network? And there are several security vulnerabilities due to that. Second, once they're connected to your network, which is your Wi-Fi and 4G and so on, how do you then connect it to the cloud securely? Right? Once it is secured on the cloud, right, how do you secure the data? Right. So once you connect those devices to the cloud, how do you secure the data on the cloud? Right. So the first two parts, essentially putting connecting your device to the Wi-Fi or 4G or Bluetooth network is, and then connecting that to the cloud is your provisioning. Uh, and the second part is essentially data security. So this talk will talk more about the first two parts, and if we have time, I'll touch upon the IoT security and on the cloud. But that is a much bigger topic in itself, and probably needs a whole talk, and even one talk is not enough. So we'll just touch briefly on that. But I'll be talking mainly on securely connecting your device to the network. And once the device is connected to the network, what do you do to secure it, securely connect it, and what are the standards today in doing that, securely connecting your IoT device to a cloud provider? So if you look at the setup, which is the first step of the process, connecting your device to the Wi-Fi network itself. In most cases, it's the Wi-Fi network, but it could also be 4G or 5G network. Right? So if you look at the consumer landscape, which is like consumer IoT devices, about 1 in 3 users, that's 30% of the user, or 33% of the user face problem in setting up a device. So if they buy a new device, they bring it home, 33% people simply have problem in setting up the device. Right? In industry, a lot of times this is done by professionals, but the time and skill required to do this by professionals is makes this very expensive as well. In consumer space, about 22% devices are returned, up to 22% of devices are returned due to setup issues. Across the industry, about 12% devices in consumers are returned due to setup issues. Right? So think about this. You are losing 12% of your revenue just because someone is not able to set up the device. Because once they're not able to set up the device, they just return it. Right? And the third is about 40% of consumer calls can be for the setup or reset up issues. So once you do the setup, you change your network for somehow, and then you have to reset up the network. And that causes about 40% of the customer calls. So it's a very expensive proposition, right? But not just expensive, it's also is fraught with several cybersecurity risks. Uh, Drive-by hacking is one. Uh, Similarly, there are several mistakes in the process when people try to make the process easier by including QR code, for example, and such steps. All the time, the network passwords are often sent in plain text, which can be snooped, which can have man-in-the-middle attack, as well as something called a drive-by hacking, wherein someone who drives around your office or the factory or your home with a really strong Wi-Fi antenna and pings these Wi-Fi devices. And once and then they get offline. Once they get offline, you try to reset up the process, and then your credentials are stolen. Uh, even though even though the whole process is not secure, and that the major reason for that process not being secure is that people are trying to make it easier for customers, right? But the customer experience is terrible, right? This is just an example of a few devices from Amazon. So if you look at the consumer devices on Amazon, they are most of them are fraught with problems of setup and reset up, and basically the first step of the IoT process itself, right? Um, Now, once the setup is done, if you do reset up, like if you change your Wi-Fi network for some reason, or if you change the device, or if you sold the device, that is even a bigger problem, right? As I mentioned just in the last slide, about 40% of customer calls could be just because of this issue. And 40% of customer calls is not only a nuisance, but it's also a big cost in terms of maintaining those call centers and so on. About 75% of cyber attacks or IoT cyber attacks are focused on the network. So most of these, so this whole process itself makes itself vulnerable to different kinds of hacking. And the other big problem here is, like, because these devices are mostly headless, which means they do not have an input surface or an input interface, you cannot really do a multi-factor authentication in a simple way. It either has to be in a very complicated way, or people just avoid it. Both the manufacturers avoid it as well as the users, right? And that opens itself to even more risk. So how do you solve this process, right? So the only way you can solve it is by securely passing your credential from your device to these devices, to these IoT devices, which could be industrial IoT devices, could be home IoT devices. Right? So network provisioning is a big problem, and one of the solutions that our company, for example, provides is called data over sound. So essentially, what this technology is, any phone becomes a data transmitter, right? Or any device essentially with a speaker becomes a data transmitter. And any device with a microphone becomes a data receiver. And they already have a pre-shared key, or they share it in a two-way communication. And hence all the communication that's between them is encrypted. So I'll show you an example of how that happens. But basically, the phone becomes a data transmitter, but the data itself is transmitted using sound. And this data is inaudible. So though it's sound, you cannot hear it because it's at the higher frequency range of the human hearing capabilities. But still, normal phones and normal microphones can receive and send this data. So you do not need to change any hardware. You can use an existing phone or a laptop or a smart speaker, and the other end there can be any device with a microphone, and that would set it up, right? So we will go through. I'll show you how that's exactly done, but let me talk through a little bit about how is the conventional Wi-Fi process. I'm sure, like most of the people here have the fortune or misfortune of basically setting up an IoT device, and it's fairly complicated, right? Fairly complicated for you, who I'm assuming most of the people here are technical, but it's also think about the people who are not technical or who are not dealing with this kind of IoT devices every day. For them, it's very, very difficult, right? So the first step is you unbox the device, you connect it to the, you power it on. Once it's powered on, it generally creates a hotspot. Then you need to connect your phone with that hotspot, right? Once your phone is connected to that hotspot or a BLE network, then you need to go to the settings of the app, and in the settings of the app, enter the SSID and password of your network. Now, setting up this itself, for example, uh, some people cannot find the right hotspot. Some people cannot find the right app to download and set it up. Once these two other people are not able to find the right location inside the app to enter the SSID and password, and some others may not even have access to their SSID and password. So it becomes an extremely complicated process, which can break down at different places. In the data over sound solution, essentially, you have either an app or a smart speaker, and we'll go through both the flows. And when you bring in a new device and unbox it, and it cannot find a network, it automatically goes into a receiving mode, and then it can receive this data from any kind of a web page or your phone. The data is always encrypted. And the biggest advantage of sound is sound does not travel the confines of physical space, right? So suppose if you are in your factory, people from outside the factory, or if you're in your home, people from outside your home cannot get access to this data. To be able to steal this data, they need to be near, or to be able to even interact with the device, they need to be in physical contact with the device. And that's one of the biggest advantages that this technology brings in. Right? In the same flow, and we go through that too, you don't even need an app or a phone. You can do this exactly with a smart speaker or say Alexa or a Google Home. So here is an example where we will be using Google Home to set up a smart device. So on the right, I'm sure a lot of people here have used Raspberry Pi, and you must know how complicated setting up a Raspberry Pi is, especially headless Raspberry Pi. So you don't have a monitor, you don't have a keyboard. How do you set them up? So it's a long process. I'll not go through that, but I'll show you how simple the process is in this example using a Google Home. I'm not sure if the StreamYard will stream the audio, but I'll talk through the audio. So in this case, basically, the Google Home device here will be transmitting, right? The Wi-Fi credentials, and the device on the right is a Raspberry Pi with a microphone that will be receiving.
Is your device in setup mode and nearby?
And we are using scale.
Broadcasting your Wi-Fi credentials.
So now it's the Google device is broadcasting it, and the Raspberry Pi next to it just received the data, made a ping, and is connected.
You have set up your device successfully.
So you just need one command or two commands, and the device will be set up. There's no need for an app, a pairing process, a connection, disconnection process, and so on. Here is another example. And in this example, what you'll see is basically the same thing, but we are using Alexa for setup. So in this case,
to find news you like, let's pick your preferred news channel.
So the device, one second. So
Fox News,
Alexa,
CBS.
cancel. Sorry. So in this case, what you will see is on the left is your Alexa device, and on the right is basically an IoT insert. So this IoT insert could be thought of like whatever you could see inside TVs, inside smart cameras, smart speakers, and so on. So that could be any IoT device. And on the left is a standard Alexa device. And Alexa, again, I'm not sure you can hear the sound, but basically I'm asking it to open a setup device now, and ask it to transmit by Wi-Fi credentials, and now it's transmitting. You wouldn't hear that because it's inaudible. The device just received it, and now it's trying to connect to the Wi-Fi. and now connected to the Wi-Fi, it send a ping back to the device. And the same exact flow can be also done using a mobile phone, right? So essentially, if you don't have Alexa or smartphone, you can do that exactly with a mobile phone or even a laptop through a web page. So I'll skip that and we'll move to the next slide. So that was how do you set up a device securely, and of course there's a standard method using Bluetooth or Wi-Fi, or the more advanced method using data over sound. The requirements here are, of course, that you need to have a speaker on one end, which could be your phone and so on, but the IoT device need to have a microphone. This is increasingly becoming easy because microphones are really very cheap now, and they are widely available in all kinds of devices. In fact, some estimate are there will be 2 billion voice control devices sold just in 2022. So once now your device is connected to the network or to the Wi-Fi, now you need to connect it to the cloud, right? And securely transfer the credentials between your network, between your device and the cloud. So essentially, the first part of that is your device needs to have some credential, and you need to have your credentials. You need to prove to the device that you are the owner of that device, right? So and then the device needs to send the data that is collecting to a cloud so that you can access that data. So let's take an example of a camera. So you bought a smart home camera or an industrial camera and you set it up. Now, once you connect it to the network, it then needs to take the send those videos or audio, whatever it's recording, to a cloud so that you can go to the cloud and access this information. So how once the device is on the network, it needs to know who to connect to, right? Where does it send the data, and who has access or who has the rights to get the data it is sending, right? So currently, this is done generally manually or it's closed. So for industrial setting, it's done is like you set up the device and there's someone who has literally the credential where you can enter into the device, which cloud to connect to, who is the user, what's the user ID for that, and who has the password or any kind of a encryption key or credential key that needs to be entered manually. Right. First, this causes a huge problem because how do you ensure that the credential that is entered manually is safe, right? Because then if you're giving it to someone, it could be stolen, it could be used by the same person nefariously, and so on, right? The second one is if you have a complete closed system, like say you bought a camera from X vendor, and that vendor has a cloud, and the camera will only connect to that cloud, and then it gives you a username and password so that you can access that information. But that creates a lot of, you need to have trust to this vendor. So suppose let's say my company Trillbit makes a camera and sells it to you, and it has its own cloud and it has its own data, and gives you a username password so that you can access this data on the cloud. Now you need to trust Trillbit that we are not accessing your data. There needs to be trust between you, the user, and a vendor like me who is selling you the device. This system is not completely trustless. So and that is the basic challenge of how do you provision and set up the cloud, which does not need this kind of trust on someone who is setting up the device for industrial cases, or trust on the vendors who will always have access to your device. So managing this whole trust on the cloud is like cloud provisioning, right? Intel has its own secure device onboarding called STO. AWS and Azure have their own, and so has Google. However, there is no industry standard in doing it. And that's how what comes up is FIDO, and I'll give you the link at the end. FIDO is FIDO is a alliance, is basically an industry standard for passwordless authentication, and they have developed a standard for provisioning. And I'll talk more about that standard and how we Trillbit can also connects our solution with FDO, which is called FIDO device onboarding. And FIDO is a very widely accepted and alliance, and its members include, industry leaders like Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, and so on. Not to forget Intel and Qualcomm, who lead it in the IoT side. So this is a slide from FIDO. What this it basically saying the onboarding or the provisioning on the cloud. What are the challenges? So one is variety of hardware. So you have different kinds of hardware. There's no standardization in types of hardware and types of operating system on those hardwares. Right. Second is most of these devices are headless. So if you try to input any credentials, passwords, codes, and so on, it's quite difficult. They have different connectivity, Wi-Fi, like we talked before, and some could also be wired. And there are other methods too. Right? Any kind of manual installation, wherein first that you need to trust the person who is doing the manual installation, and then he needs to be skilled. So an example is, like, suppose if you're building, say, a power plant or even a nuclear power plant. Now there needs to be a guy who goes and install all the sensors, all the smoke, from smoke detectors to cameras to for example, even sensors which have critical functionality in maintaining that facility, right? How do you ensure that data is being sent to the right owner? And there are not a few sensors in between who are sending the data to someone else, some nefarious party or some adversarial group who are not the owner of the device. Right? So this is a huge problem, and FIDO is solving it using basically a cryptographic chain of possession. So essentially, when you have a device, you need to maintain how the device goes through manufacturing process, because just like you have a device, when it goes through you need to ensure that each of the manufacturing process is secure, so that they're not that the device does not have things that you don't intend to have. Right? You need to ensure security-wise that you have chain of command of the device. Similarly, what FIDO is doing is, like, it's also maintaining a chain of command of the credentials. Like, the credentials never leave the chain of command. It doesn't go. No one sees it who do not have ownership of the device. And when the ownership of the device changes, so does the credential change. Right. So here is the FIDO device onboarding, the whole schematic of it. So let's go through step one. Just doing a time check. So I think we have 15 minutes more. So in the first step, the device is manufactured. When the device is manufactured, there is the device gets basically device has an ownership voucher, which is transferred to the owner of the device. So when the device is sold, the ownership voucher goes to whoever is owner of the device, and he provisions it or puts it on a cloud, target cloud. This cloud could be your choice. It could be Azure, Google Cloud, or it could be your personal server. Right? The important part here is, like, this cloud when the device is manufactured, it doesn't need to know which cloud it's going to, because the owner of the device, so you, or say a government agency, bought this device, it will decide where the data will go. Right? It's not pre-binded to a fixed cloud. So it could be, Azure or AWS or its own private cloud. Once the device goes, so this ownership voucher, whenever whoever buys the device gets this ownership voucher, which it can load on the cloud. What the device itself has is basically a root of trust, right? And uh, that device knows of a rendezvous server. So how it works is through a rendezvous server. So once the device is manufactured, at the same time it has its credential, which is a cryptographic credential linked to the device, which is saved on a TPM or a secure location, a secure memory on the device. When the device is then sold, the ownership voucher is given to the owner of the device. Next step, which is step in this flow diagram, this is the step 4. When the device comes online, which is like you onboard the device on a network, say Wi-Fi network, which we did in the last step, the device then pings a rendezvous server, which is programmed into the IoT device. This rendezvous server is like a server in between that is basically connecting the device to the target cloud. And how this credential is made is through the ownership voucher. So this device, when it comes online, it hits the rendezvous server. And when you have set up your own cloud with this ownership voucher, that the rendezvous server knows that and makes this connection. So it's like akin to a DNS server. And once this connection is made, then your IoT device in step 5 directly talks to the cloud, and there is no need for rendezvous server in between or any. So if you look at the whole flow, there is a complete root of trust maintained between the device and the ownership, and there is no need for any kind of setup or any kind of provisioning on the device. So everything is done in a trustless manner, in a passwordless manner, without the need for any intermediary skilled worker who needs to set this up. So this is an architecture flow for using different. Well, there are a few versions of it, but what's shown here is basically using this rendezvous server along with data over sound. So essentially, when the device, if first you connect the device to a network, right, through sound. Now the device may or may, so we are adding another late binding layer here, where the device may or may not know which rendezvous server it needs to go to. So basically that rendezvous server information can also be sent later on using data over sound. So data over sound here sends the rendezvous server information after the device gets online, and the device knows the rendezvous server that it needs to go to with its credentials, and the rendezvous server would know would basically connect this IoT device with the IoT platform or the cloud platform that we are using. So the last part here is IoT data security. So now that we have securely first onboarded our IoT on the Wi-Fi or the network, and now connected that device to a secure cloud, how do you maintain the security of data on the cloud? Now, this is a bigger topic, and I'm not an expert on this, but I'll talk about a few aspects of it, and then we'll have maybe some time for discussion and questions if there are any. So once you have connected your IoT device to your cloud, you are getting a stream of data from your IoT device to the cloud. So the first and most important is like, who has access to that cloud data, and how do you manage the credentials properly, like access control and credential control of your cloud data. The second is the data both in transit, which is the data that is coming from your cloud is encrypted, and the data that is stored on the cloud is that encrypted as well. So always the standard practice is to encrypt the data both while in transit, called TLS, and when it is stored on the cloud. And the third part is like, if you're sharing the data, what protocols are you using to share the data, and what are the credentials you are sharing, and how you are managing those encryption keys when you're sharing this data with other parties who may not have access to all of the data, right? And if you have and maybe a little bit about homomorphic future or homomorphic encryption and how that is the future in data sharing. So here is an example of whenever you have an IoT device and there is any for any secure infrastructure, you need to ensure that there are multiple factors of authentication, right? And this multiple factor authentication often is not possible in these IoT devices, is because they do not have an interface, right? A user interface where you can enter your fingerprint or passwords and so on. So in this case, we are using just a microphone on the device, which a lot of them have. Either you can use like a voice recognition or voice recognition, but voice recognition is not really safe. And the reason it's not safe is because of deepfakes. Deepfakes are becoming increasingly better every day in fooling these systems, and that could be a huge problem if you're using voice recognition in the future. For now, it's okay. But one of the solutions for this is using the exact same system, which is the microphone on these devices, which are being used for voice recognition, to use it using data over sound. So with data over sound, you can use an active, proper multi-factor authentication. It's actually more secure than the current multi-factor authentication protocols. The reason why it is more secure, that it's real time. It doesn't need to wait for, when you get a multi-factor authentication code, they're generally tied to a number, 1 minute, 2 minutes, and so on, or 90 seconds. But in this case, the data is real time. Often you get a code which is visible on your phone and also susceptible to SIM jacking and so on. The codes that are transferred here over data over sound are completely encrypted. It's one time and it's real time, and nobody sees the code. It could be alphanumeric or it could be in any format that you want. So it's completely safe against any kind of man-in-the-middle attack or any kind of a SIM jacking attack as well. So essentially, you need to have some kind of a zero trust, and as either a zero trust passwordless authentication or a multi-factor authentication, both on the cloud as well as the credential on the device. The ideal way, one way to do it is if you have fingerprints and if you have such things on the device, then to implement a passwordless authentication protocol such as FIDO, or at least to a multi-factor authentication, any kind of a multi-factor authentication. And one of the best options there is using, and if you have a microphone on the device, then use data over sound for a multi-factor authentication on these devices, as well as for access on the cloud. The other one which I was talking about is passwordless authentication using FIDO. So you can do any kind of public-private key authentication, either in an authenticator or any kind of an app. There are links to FIDO Alliance that provides a standard guideline as well as certification for cryptographic multi-factor authentication and passwordless access. We have a solution too where we give you can do the multi-factor authentication using data over sound. So all you need is a speaker from a phone and a microphone, and essentially the private key always sits on your private device. It never goes to the cloud. It sits on your smartphone or on your laptop or any other device where you can give your fingerprint. So this could be security keys as well, such as YubiKey and so on. And the private and the public key is on the cloud or on the website or any kind of where you are more vulnerable. So essentially, for every login or access request, your cloud sends a challenge signed by the public key, and then you need to send the challenge back, the response to this challenge back using by after signing it with a private key. And this challenge response method ensures that there is no the response is only provided after you give a your fingerprint or face ID and so on. So it ensures that there's a biometric proof, but the biometric proof always relies and stays on your device. So it never goes to the cloud, and hence even if the cloud is hacked for some reason, you never lose your private key, and hence your system is not compromised. This whole thing can be done over sound. If you do essentially when you try to log into the system plays a sound which is basically the challenge signed with your public key, and then your device, which could be your phone, receives it and sends a response back signed with your private key, and then essentially you can get access. So this is a passwordless access into your into both the device as well as the cloud using a cryptographic MFA, or passwordless using FIDO. One of the advantage here over sound is we already talked about this, but basically sound does not cross physical boundaries. So if you have a wall and so on, you can ensure that if you include a data over sound protocol, then nothing will cross that wall, or nothing will cross physical boundaries, and hence anyone outside the physical space will not be able to access the device. And this is a huge step in terms of giving both a proof of presence and ensuring direct connectivity, and completely bypasses a lot of man-in-the-middle attacks, as well as a lot of social engineering attacks. The other aspect of this, or the second aspect of this, is encryption. So there are a lot of encryptions. First, all data that is transmitted from your IoT device to your cloud has to be encrypted. Though there is a lot of practices where this data is not encrypted, and they rely on some transport layer like HTTPS to do that. But you should maintain the chain of command of your data, and the data has to be always encrypted. One of the reasons why it is not encrypted is some of these devices have low computing power. They are small IoT devices, and a lot of people do not want to perform expensive encryption tasks on these devices. So one of the examples which I suggest is to use ChaCha20, because that is a lightweight encryption module, and at the same time it has similar performance to AES, but it does not use block cipher, so you have higher efficiency. Because your data doesn't need to be in a blocks, it's a stream cipher, so you can continuously stream the data directly from your IoT device to your cloud. Once stored in cloud, you have much more options of encryption, and which this should be used more and more. One of the things that I really want to talk here, or give you an idea about, is that you should look at also another important aspect, which is a whole topic on itself, is once you have the data, how do you share the data with your clients, with other parties who have interest in that data, or increasingly now, how do you share your data with vendors who might be doing some data analytics, machine learning, or AI on that data without giving up private access to your data. And one of the most promising technology coming up here, and is a thing of the future, which is already there, startups starting doing that, is homomorphic encryption, which is essentially that people can run computation on your data without getting access to the data. So they can run the computer models, AI ML models on the data, but you don't necessarily need to share the data with them. So that is a huge step that is going to change how we store and share data, and how AI/ML works on IoT data, which we'll be seeing very soon in a few years. So I think that is it. That is all I had, and that's exactly 45 minutes. So I'd be happy to answer any questions. And
Okay, so
and
sir, yes, sir. So like we have some more questions, some questions to address. So shall we jump up onto it?
sure, sounds good.
Okay, so this question is, I'm a college student. I want to explore the field of IoT, but I'm facing issues with financial part. I'm not sure how to cope up with this.
Uh, so I think see, there are two things, right? One is everything is out there is free on YouTube, right? So if you have a phone and a YouTube connection, thanks to Geo, everything is free, like data. So all this information is free, and everything you can, and there are experts giving out for free. There are IoT communities who are building things for free. Now, for a lot of this kind of IoT things, you don't necessarily, like, it depends on, like, do you want to build IoT or do you want to work on IoT and build systems? So there's like software part and there is hardware part, and then there is somewhere is a mixture between hardware and software. So if you look at software part, uh, you do not really need any investment. All you need is your conviction, and take up online free courses. And if you need hardware wise, some of the hardware, like ARM, Raspberry Pi, uh, and so on, are very cheap. So even if you are into building a real hardware modules or hardware IoT stuff, it's not that expensive in that terms. Uh,
Okay, so and also we have experts like Bhaskar sir and multiple experts MVPs who are facilitating communities through their knowledge, who are here to give expert session on any topics like this. Like right now we are doing it on Azure IoT and security. So stay connected with us so you can definitely benefit. And I guess networking is, sir, I guess you will agree with this because networking is the best part to get everything for free. This is what I think.
yeah, yeah, and it's and lot of, like, look at the example of Linux, right? Linux, entire Linux is created by communities.
Yes.
They're not, like, there are business models, but they're not getting paid for it. And so
Yes.
there's a lot of scope of open source and communities. And if you participate in them, you get, there are a lot of people who have got benefit from them, and they're willing to give it back to the community, like, where they're willing to give it back to you. So you're right.
Yeah. Yeah. So next question we have: how can we find vulnerabilities of the most prevalent vulnerability of weak, accessible, and hard-coded passwords?
Can you repeat that question?
Okay, so the question in the chat, so if you can
Yeah.
read it out.
How can we find vulnerabilities of the most prevalent vulnerability of weak, guessable, and hard-coded password? So first thing is, like, uh, always, as soon as possible, we should move to passwordless. So that's what my opinion is, that whenever there is password, it's going to be unsafe. It's like you're saying, how can I drive at uh, 100 kilometers per hour in on a single lane road? So the question is, like, never drive at 100 kilometers per hour in a single lane road. If it's possible, change that whole paradigm. So that's the biggest thing. Is, like, we should move away from password, is my thing. And Fido is the one I put up the link, is doing great work. But if you have to, but it's not always possible, so I understand that. And in that case, we should never use coded password. There has to be a password management system in which first, so the password should always be, for example, more than 8 characters, should include special characters, numbers, and letters. It should always have this password management issue and should never accept weaker than this password. Yes, that makes it increasingly hard to remember and hard to manage because we have like so many accounts, and how do you do that? So that's where MFA comes in, and multi-factor authentication, and we need to find better ways of doing multi-factor authentication as well.
Yeah, so another question from Rajesh. He's asking what type of issues comes under insecure ecosystem interfaces.
So I think like there are, I don't get the question exactly, because when you say insecure interfaces or not secured interfaces, there are that itself is a huge number of interfaces, right? Like so I don't know which interface is talking about. So, but if you look at it, like whenever there are two systems interfacing, that's the biggest security failure, or that's where a lot of security problems come from. So if you look at, even if you look at 4G and 5G, 5G is in itself is supposed to be more secure than 4G, and 4G is also secure. But whenever the 4G and 5G bands are interacting, and whenever you are switching the network, that's where the biggest vulnerability comes in. So this is at a very high level. But whenever you look at a system which is doing the credential transfer in the same protocol as the primary communication, there is always going to be some security flaws, and sometimes this can go on undetected for years, but then somebody smart like you comes in and then finds out that and they exploit it. Or hopefully now there's a whole ecosystem of penetration testers and ethical hackers who actually hack these systems and then let the manufacturers and companies know, and they get rewarded for it. So that's a good thing that has come up in last few years. But yes, they have been exploited wherever there is an interface. They often get exploited in that sense.
Okay, so one more question we have, one last question, sir. So can you share the architecture of Trailbit, how we can use it? I'm a lead DevOps engineer having an interest in IoT devices.
That's a great question. You can go to our webpage, www.trailbit.com, and I can share with you essentially the most, in a simple terms. Let me just share my screen. One second. So can you see my screen? So
Yes,
great. So basically, you have your application layer. That application layer could have any data that you want to send. So the sender will have any data that you want to send, and that application layer converts this. So that is coming from your application or your IoT devices. We take that data and we encrypt it. Once it's encrypted, we encode that data in our own encoding scheme, along with and along with encryption, we also add error correcting codes and so on, which is all internal to our SDK. And what you get output is basically a sound file, which is a WAV file or a stream of or a data stream that can be played on any speaker. So basically, this is the transmitter side of the speaker. So you give SDK, you give the data, it takes this data, encrypts it, adds a few internal signal processing layers, and then transmits it over the sound. The other part is a receiver SDK that basically receives this data, receives the sound from the microphone. It takes it decodes the data from our SDK. Then it does the encryption using the encryption key that we have or that we will share with you, and then you get your data out. So this is in general the low level architecture. But on top of it, there are a lot of things that we have done. We have encryption, we have authentication protocol using FIDO, we have a TOTP protocol using OpenSSL and so on. So you can use it for any kind of passwordless authentication. You can use it for multi-factor authentication. You can use it for device provisioning and setup, or any time you want to send to some critical information between two devices. You can use this system. We also have APIs. So if you're using between web and mobile phones, you don't need to use our you can use our SDK, but if you don't want to, you don't need to. You can simply use the API. So the API will give you the stream of data that you want to play on your browser, as well as record. So it can be done as well from a browser point of view. For most of the IoT application, there has to be an SDK, and this is at low level what the SDK does.
So thank you, sir. So that's it with the questions. If you have any questions from the audience, so guys, if you have any questions, so do drop your question in the comment section. We are open to questions. Otherwise, okay, no questions. Yes, sir, we don't have any questions now. So let's wrap the session. Thank you, Bhaskar sir, for coming in, giving your incredible insights about Trailbit, about the IoT devices, and about the hardware software part, and about the data security on IoT devices. It was a very insightful session. And okay, so here is the link, guys. So someone was asking about how you can use the Trailbit in the best way. So I hope sir answered your questions properly. And here is the link if you want to visit the website. So here is the link, so you can use this. Also, let me share just a second. I'm sharing one link with you all. Just give me a couple of seconds. Okay. Okay, so you can okay, perfect. So here is the LinkedIn profile of Bhaskar sir. I'm sharing it again, so do connect with sir so that you can get to know about his work, about his research, and everything. Whatever he's doing, he's contributing a lot to the community, and you can just connect with him on the LinkedIn. So here is the LinkedIn profile of Bhaskar sir. And one last announcement from my side: the link you tickering in your front screen is of Discord channel of Azure developer community. So we are doing an initiative of 7 days, 7 domain quiz, and today is the day 3 of 7 days, 7 domain quiz, and today it's on Azure web application. So you can participate in the Azure quiz, and you can get a chance to win Microsoft Swags, and top 50 winners will be getting Microsoft Azure portal passes also. So do participate in the quiz, and we do a lot of initiative like this, and it's like fun activities for you all, because every day you are learning so many things from us, from the experts like Bhaskar sir and everyone. So do participate in the quiz. Thank you, sir. Thank you for joining in.
Thank you. Thank you, Lakshit. Thank you, everyone, who was here.
Bye. Yeah, see you, sir.
Bye.